Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this special presentation for the Hyatt Distinguished Leadership Series. It's my outstanding pleasure this morning to introduce a great friend of Georgia Tech's and a great friend of mine, Dr. Reginald DesRoches. Dr. DesRoches and I met unbelievably at New Faculty Orientation way back in 1997. We've enjoyed developing our early careers together here in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Georgia Tech, and developed a great friendship over the years. Dr. DesRoches was a faculty member at Georgia Tech for nearly 20 years. He held a number of leadership positions on campus. He served as the Karen and John Huff School Chair for CEE from 2012 to 2017, and laid the foundation for many important initiatives that I'm proud to continue as school chair today. In 2017, Dr. DesRoches left Georgia Tech to become the William and Stephanie Sick Dean of Engineering at Rice University. He remained in that role for only 3 years before being selected to serve as the Howard Hughes Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Rice University, starting in the midst of a pandemic, no less. Dr. DesRoches is an internationally recognized scholar in earthquake and structural engineering, focused on the design of resilient infrastructure systems under extreme loads and the application of smart materials to those applications. He has won many awards, so I will only mention a few highlights to keep things brief this morning. He was awarded the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers with Pre-Case, a very prestigious award in 2002. He was awarded Georgia Tech's ANIC Award in 2008, which is the highest honor that the undergraduate student body can bestow on a Georgia Tech faculty member. And most recently in 2020, he was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. Among his many accomplishments during his time as school chair at Georgia Tech, Dr. DesRoches initiated the Hyatt Leadership Lecture Series as one of the important pieces of our school's focus on developing engineer leaders. This includes courses in leadership and grand challenges, as well as global engineering leadership minor program, one of the 3 tracks in the Institute's leadership studies program. The Hyatt Lecture Series brings a distinguished leader to campus every fall and spring to share their leadership story with our students and with the broader Georgia Tech community. The lecture series was made possible through the generous support of Kenneth Hyatt, who received his undergraduate degree in civil engineering in 1962 and a master's degree in industrial management in 1966. We're grateful to Ken for endowing this series. Dr. DesRoches left a legacy of leadership at Georgia Tech, and today he will share his wisdom and speak about the 10 C's of academic leadership. For the audience, during and after the presentation, you may type your questions into the Q&A function, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. That Q&A text will be moderated at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Dr. DesRoches to deliver his presentation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. And I think Emily's going to pull up my presentation since I can't do it from my computer. I think it's going to be more effective. And as soon as it comes on, I will begin. There we go. Great. Thank you, Emily. Again, thank you, Don, for the kind introduction, and thank you for your leadership of the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering, which under your leadership is just doing incredible things. And so thank you. It's a pleasure to be back at Georgia Tech, even albeit virtually. I have clearly many good friends, including Don and others and colleagues. It was my first job before I left to go to Rice, and it's really at Georgia Tech is where I really was able to learn about leadership and have the opportunity to hold several positions. So I will forever be indebted to Georgia Tech for the opportunities that it's given me. So if I, next slide. So this is a very special presentation for me, partly because I know Ken very well, Mr. Hyatt, and I was there. I had lunch with Mr. Hyatt in 2013, in the spring of 2013, where he conceived of the idea to have a lecture series to bring back alumni and leaders to come to talk to students about their accomplishments and how they've achieved their accomplishments. His only concern at the time was he didn't think there'd be enough alums to come back and impart their wisdom on our students. And I'm glad to see that that in fact was not the case. And we've had some just incredible speakers over the past few years since the lecture series has started. This is a picture from the first inaugural Hyatt lecture in 2015. I'm sure the person on the left needs no introduction. Dr. Wayne Clough was the first speaker, and I was very fortunate to be able to introduce him, and that's Mr. Hyatt in the middle. Wayne Clough, the former president and former secretary of the Smithsonian, as well as an accomplished civil engineer, was the perfect person, in my opinion, to kick off this incredible lecture series. And since then, there were just an incredible list of alumni that have come back and spoken to the group. Next slide. So I would encourage the students, if you have not had a chance to go back, they're all archived. I had the opportunity to see the first 4 or 5 in person before I left Georgia Tech. And again, there were just incredible speakers that were part of that series, including Bill Calhoun, General Phil Breedlove, Wick Moorman, Emmy Montoya, Andy Phelps, my good friend John Huff, who currently resides in Houston and who I'm staying in close touch with. All of them were exceptional leaders. All of them were well accomplished, and they accomplished things in different areas and in different ways. And so I'm just honored to be amongst this group of speakers, distinguished alums, and distinguished lecturers to come back and speak to you. So next slide. Before I begin on the 10 C's, I just want to talk briefly about my journey and how I got to where I am, because I think that's an important part of my leadership style, my leadership approach is my journey and how I got here. And so if we go through, I think the slides are animated. I was raised in New York City, and I think why that's important. I was actually born in Haiti in the Caribbean. I came to New York when I was just a baby, when I was 1, and ended up being raised in New York before going off to Berkeley. And I think what New York taught me is just being resilient, being resourceful, being tough. And I think those are skills that I've tried to maintain in my leadership style, as well as how I approach a variety of things. I left New York in 1985 to go to UC Berkeley. That's a whole story in and of itself. At the time, I hadn't heard of Berkeley. I was invited to have a free air trip to California in January when it was snowy and cold in New York. And I landed in California, my first time in California, and I thought, this is where I want to be, nice and sunny and warm. And so I ended up going to Berkeley, not knowing much about the school. Unfortunately, it was a very, very good engineering school. I majored in mechanical engineering, primarily because I really didn't know the difference between mechanical and civil, the other engineering disciplines. And in 1989, something happened. Those of you who are old enough will remember. The students will not, for sure. There was a major earthquake in the Bay Area that really sparked my interest in studying earthquakes and how you can build structures to withstand earthquakes. If you continue to click. And so I completed my undergraduate degree in mechanical and then switched over to do my master's in civil engineering and then subsequently my PhD in civil engineering and finished my PhD in 1997 and was fortunate enough to get a job offer, my only offer. Fortunately, it was a great offer and obviously changed my life to join the faculty in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Georgia Tech in 1998. And so I was a regular faculty member. I did what faculty members do. I was involved in research and teaching different classes in the school. I had pretty big research groups at one point. This is a picture of a group when I had, I think, 8 PhD students. I just absolutely loved being a professor. I loved the aspects of teaching and research and engaging with graduate students. If you continue to click, one of the things that did end up changing quite a bit of my career is 2010 Haiti earthquake, and I'll speak to that more as we move forward in some of these slides. But it was really an event that changed me and changed my view of the role of civil engineers, and in some ways changed the path of my career. If you click again, in 2008, I had my first opportunity to serve as a leader. in the leadership position, I was appointed as associate chair, working with Joe Hughes, then the chair of the department. And it was really my first taste of leadership, and it was a great opportunity to learn from Joe and others around. And when Dr. Hughes left to become dean at Drexel, I was appointed chair of the school in 2012. If you click again, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do during that time was to serve as faculty athletic rep, which was a great opportunity to see a different aspect of the university, to understand better the role of athletics and student athletes. And it was just a great enriching and learning experience for me as somebody who was trying to develop my skills as a leader. Click one more time. After nearly 20 years at Georgia Tech, I was invited to consider an opportunity to serve as Dean of Engineering at Rice, and a position that I ended up accepting in 2017. Again, after nearly 20 years, and as is always the case, it's really a matter of timing. For me, I had been at Georgia Tech nearly 20 years. I had done the chair's job. I was about to finish my term as chair. And it was great from a personal perspective. My kids were just about to be out of high school and going off to college. And so it was the right time and the right opportunity for me. And as difficult as it was for me to leave a place that I loved and spend my entire career, I felt it was time for me to move on and pursue other things. One more click. And then after serving in that position for about 2.5 years, I was selected and appointed as provost of the university, a position that I currently hold, that I began roughly in the summer of last year. All right. So we go to the next slide. So people often ask, what is a provost? It's not really clear. Everybody seems to know what a dean is, but nobody seems to know what a provost is. In fact, when I told my father, 88 years old, that I was being appointed provost, he thought I had done something wrong and was being demoted. But in fact, I had to explain to him that it's not a demotion at all. But people don't understand what a provost is, and these are the various definitions of provost. If you look in the dictionary, the one I like the most and often is applicable is a prison warden. But the provost is typically referred to as the chief academic officer of the university and really oversees all aspects of the academic mission of the university. The next slide goes into a little bit more detail on the key responsibilities of a provost, and it really varies by university, the specific details, but in general, most provosts have these details. If you continue to click, we can walk through some of these. Very much involved in the hiring, promotion, and tenuring of the faculty. One of the most important things that we do as provosts, overseeing the academic programs both at the undergraduate and graduate level. At Rice, the research enterprise reports to the provost at some universities, including Georgia Tech. There's a vice president that oversees the research enterprise. Space allocation, which is never a fun thing. Academic processes. We also oversee the student and faculty and diversity programs, faculty diversity and student programs. The provost supports the deans and serves as a voice for the faculty and helps to advance the strategic goals set by the president. Next slide. This is a phrase that I found that I really do find quite applicable as it relates to the provost, a facilitator, advocator, mediator, and conflict resolver, a friend to all, a best friend to none. And it can be a very isolated position. Many people I've talked to say it is the most difficult position at a university. I've never been president, so I don't know how that is. I'm sure there are many challenges of being a university president or chancellor, but certainly this has been the most challenging administrative and leadership position I've had, partly because you're really halfway between the administration and the faculty, which sometimes have competing interests. I still consider myself a faculty member. I have faculty appointments, but in many ways I am also part of the administration, and there's this tug and pull between those two entities that can make the job fairly complex. I had the opportunity to speak to your provost, who, again, I have the greatest respect for. You're very fortunate, by the way, at Georgia Tech to have just two outstanding leaders in and Dean Behai and Provost McLaughlin both are new in their positions, and I know they will do great things. But Provost McLaughlin and I were talking about how much more complex the job of a provost is compared to a dean. You're dealing with a much more diverse part of the university. For me here at Rice, I have a music school, I have an engineering school, architecture, humanities, social science, and they all have different cultures, different approaches, different ways they do things, and trying to manage all that can be quite complex. So if we go to the next slide. So I want to speak about what I've learned in terms of academic leadership and some of the lessons I've obtained over the years. I'll say as a caveat that I've been very, very fortunate to work with some incredible leaders. I've learned a lot from them. Much of my leadership has been learned from working with great leaders, and I've also learned from people who have made mistakes and people who have been flawed in their leadership, and I try to learn from those too. I'm still learning as a leader. And I will continue to learn and grow my leadership skills. And so this is just my take on some of the things that are important as you think about leadership, particularly in an academic setting, although I think many of the things in this slide deck, in these 10 C's, apply not just to academia, but to pretty much any type of organization you might be in. So, next slide. So the first is obviously being connected and making connections. And if you go back and listen to the various Hyatt speakers, I think nearly everyone, one of the first things they talked about was the importance of building relationships and building trust with people and making connections and being connected. It is absolutely one of the most important traits of a leader is being connected and making connections and building relationships. First thing I did when I arrived at Rice, because I was new and didn't know people, I visited every single one of the faculty members in the School of Engineering. Granted, as a caveat, the School of Engineering at Rice is about a third, and maybe even less of the size of the school, of the College of Engineering at Georgia Tech. So it's something that's more manageable, about 120 at the time. Now we're around 140, but about 120 faculty members. I met with them, met with their students, visited their labs. I thought it was important for me to go to them as opposed to them having to come to me. I thought it sent a message. I thought they felt more comfortable in their labs. And to me, it was one of the best things for me to do, not just because I had the opportunity to learn about their research, understand their challenges, see their space, see how things are laid out in the university, but it also gave me the chance to see how they're connected to other aspects in the School of Engineering and other aspects of the university. And also what it did is it built trust. It absolutely built trust, so that if I had to make a tough decision, or if I had to call on them to do something, having met with them and having spent time with them really made a big difference as far as how you interact. I also did the same thing with alumni. I spent quite a bit of time that first year traveling all over the U.S., much of it in California because we have a large alumni base there, meeting alumni, learning about their experience at Rice, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, where they want to see the School of Engineering at Rice go. And again, it allowed me to build that relationship with our alumni base. So you have to make the time to build those connections. One of the other things that it does is it allows you to connect pieces together. I often find myself saying, Jane, you need to call Jim, because if together you guys can write a great proposal on X, or you guys can really have the opportunity to work together in a meaningful way. And it takes you really understanding what people do and seeing how they're connected to be able to do that effectively. So the next slide. And you hear this all the time, communication, 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 the importance of communicating constantly. You've probably heard the phrase, tell people what you're going to do it, and then tell them that you've done it. And you really can't communicate enough. It's absolutely an important thing to do. Nowadays it's complicated because there are so many different modes of communication, including print material. Obviously, social media has changed the landscape in terms of ways to communicate to different audiences, cell phone, web, obviously, and email. I think what's important here is that you have to know best what mode of communication works for the message and the audience you're trying to communicate with. And I think too often people are afraid. There are some things that you have to do in person. You have to be willing to just step out and talk to somebody in person. And I think right now it's become too easy to do things via text or do things via email. And I think it's important that we continue to try to find ways to connect with each other in person. Obviously now it's much more challenging with COVID, but even before COVID, there was a tendency for people to try to avoid that and do it quickly via an email. The many times, or the times when I've often had to apologize for something, it often has to do with not communicating something effectively or clearly, or without letting people know that you're doing something, you just do it. And so communicating is important. It leads to transparency and it helps also build trust in your community. Next slide. So collaboration, and you hear this all the time about the importance of collaborating across disciplines, and especially in a university where by default we are divided into various groups, right? So at Georgia Tech you have colleges or schools. So you have colleges and then you have schools within the colleges, and each of the schools, such as civil and environmental engineering, has affinity groups, and so you're really stovepiped. So it's important that as a leader, you find ways to bring people together and to foster collaborations, particularly across really disparate disciplines, right? So obviously we want the geotechs to collaborate with the structural engineers, and that's great, but we really want to move beyond that. We want to have musicians collaborate with our electrical engineers, or mechanical engineers collaborate with our artists, or historians collaborating with our bioengineers. Those are the types of collaborations that are extremely rich and where you get some really incredible things coming out of it. And the picture on the left here is a picture from a project that we funded where our musicians, in fact, were working with our electrical engineers to better understand COVID and the impact of COVID during musical performances, whether it's singing or playing an instrument, particularly a wind instrument. And the electrical engineers had tools to visualize that and better understand whether the 6 feet distance was adequate or whether you needed more. And it was an example of bringing two very different disciplines together to work together around a very important project. So next, let me just add to that. If you recall, Steve Jobs portrayed Apple as really combining the best of engineering and the humanities. In fact, in his commencement speech at Stanford, he emphasized the importance of design and art for its own sake. He cited his taste for calligraphy, which inspired the pleasing graphical user interface for the Macintosh, which was much better, of course, than the Microsoft operating system from a visual perspective. So the next slide. Community builder. So as a leader, you are building a community. It's important that you work really hard to build a community of people that work together and enjoy being part of a team. And so people often ask, what do you look for when you're hiring faculty members? Clearly, you look for people or other people as part of your team. You clearly look for people that are talented, that have great skill sets, but it's absolutely critical that you want somebody that's going to be part of a team and work together as a team. The worst thing you could do is hire somebody that's extremely talented but is toxic, because it completely destroys everything you've tried to do or you're trying to do within that organization. So your role as a leader is also helping fostering an environment where you're building a community. The more together your group is, the more effective they'll be in accomplishing their goals. Next slide. And an agent of change. And so this is one where there's no doubt when you come into an organization as a leader, you're going to be hired to make change. They're going to say, boy, we need somebody to change this, whether it's changing the culture, changing how you operate, changing approaches and processes. You will be asked to lead a change because that's why they hired you, because they want you to change how some things are done. And it's a very difficult thing to do, particularly if people have been doing it for a long time. Academia is known for being such that change is difficult and people remain stagnant. And so as a leader, you're going to have to figure out how to motivate people and motivate your organizations to be able to change how they do things, to change their culture, to change how they think about processes and approaches. And you also have to constantly question how you're doing things yourself. I'm a fan of bringing people in to look at your organizations and constantly thinking about ways you can do things better to remain competitive with your peers. The worst thing you can do as an organization is to remain stagnant and not realize the changes that are happening around you to stay competitive. And so you have to be an agent of change as a leader. Next slide. And then courage. And there are many forms that courage takes. There's the courage to take risks. And if you continue to animate through this, which is an important thing, you're going to have to take risk at some point in your career, either as a researcher, but also as a leader. And for me, the 2010 Haiti earthquake was a time where I took a risk. I had been a faculty member for about 12 years. I was sort of hitting my stride as a researcher. I had a big research group. My research was going really well. I received a phone call to consider coming to Haiti. This was less than a week after the earthquake, to be part of a group that was going to do building investigations. They were looking for people who spoke the local language. The situation in Haiti was quite acute at the time. There were health hazards, security hazards. We didn't know how we'd get there. We didn't know where we would stay. And it was one of those things where I was literally frightened to get on the plane and go there because I just didn't know what to expect. The reports out of the news were somewhere around 200,000 dead. It ended up being closer to 250,000 or more dead. But I took a risk. I took a risk despite having 3 sort of pre-teenage kids. And it was the greatest thing, one of the greatest things I've done in my career. I learned a lot about myself and the things that I can do. I learned a lot about how you tough it out. The conditions were extremely tough, and it was one of those things that really changed my life in many ways from a personal perspective, and in some ways professionally also. But it required me having faith in taking a risk that things would be okay. Courage also comes into making tough decisions, and as a leader, you will be constantly making tough decisions. Many of them have to do with allocating resources. Who gets more resources when you have 4 or 5 people asking for them? And these are difficult decisions, and you will always end up getting some people upset. The other difficult decision that you will absolutely have to make when you're a leader is terminating staff and making staffing changes. And those are difficult things to do. And I remember the first time I had to do that in the leadership position at Georgia Tech, I was frightened. I mean, I was sweating, my hands were shaking. You feel bad personally because you're impacting people's lives. But those are absolutely important things to do because it's not fair to the person and it's not fair to the organization to keep somebody that's not right for that organization. So they're really tough things to do, and they will always be tough. And in fact, if they're not tough to do those things, there's something perhaps wrong with you. They are tough things to do, but you have to have the courage to make those decisions because it's not fair to everybody involved to keep people on longer than they need. Next slide. So core values, if we click through that one more time, you always have to stick to your core values. People often will ask, how do you know how you're going to make a decision, whether to invest in this or that? Whenever we think about, this was the case at Georgia Tech and certainly the case at Rice, whenever I consider launching new programs or new initiatives, I always ask myself, does this align with the core values that we have at Rice and my own core values? Does this align with the vision of the university? Does this align with our mission? And if it doesn't, whether it brings a lot of resources to you, you have to question whether or not it's the right thing to do. So sticking with your core values as a guidepost for how you make decisions is absolutely important. And nobody can question you if you're sticking with your core values and aligning with your mission and your vision. Next slide. You have to be a champion for others, and this is something that is absolutely important. When you become a leader, it's no longer about your accomplishments and your successes, which is difficult. As a faculty member, you're trained to go out and compete for grants, compete for awards, compete for recognition. And as a leader, you have to put those aside, and your success is really about getting others to be successful. This is what you need to do, and I've been in situations where I've seen leaders that have a hard time letting that go. And I think you can't be an effective leader if you're still in the mode of competing with your faculty and not really putting championing others as the forefront in your mind. Just the other day, I got an email from one of the faculty at Rice. One of the things we started doing, working with my communications person at Rice, is every day or 3 times a week, we'll post up something on LinkedIn. And we try to make it as personal as possible about an accomplishment of a faculty member or staff or a student at the university. And he just sent me an email, literally, this was on Friday, saying, I want to thank you for something I've been noting on LinkedIn, and we do this via the LinkedIn portal. Your very on-point posts about staff at the university. Since I joined Rice in 2007, I've never seen a senior person from Rice celebrate the accomplishments of faculty, students, and others. These have been left to the PR department, which does not ring as authentic. So really, you have to spend time and you have to spend energy on championing others. It's absolutely important to do. Next slide. So consultative leadership, and I love this cartoon, which talks about 2 people that they've grown themselves and they think they have the right decision. You really have to consult a very wide spectrum of people when you're trying to make a decision, from your peers to people that report to you, different constituents, including faculty, staff, students, alumni, because they all have very different perspectives, and you learn a lot about different nuances about a decision and different implications when you engage a very broad group of people in a decision-making process. So don't get in the habit of, it's easy to get in the habit of asking the same people, the people you know will agree with you. It's a lot easier doing that, and it's a lot more work going to a broad audience, particularly when you know there will be people that push back, but you will learn things from people that push back on you. You'll learn potential implications of your decisions. You may not agree with them, but at least you'll be more informed when you move forward and make that decision. So consultative leadership is about the ability to influence people rather than impose on them. And it's important to learn that skill very early on. It's a lot more work, but it's an absolutely important thing to do. Next slide. So using carrots more than sticks. And this is something that it took me a long time to learn this, I think. And it's easier to use to sort of punish people for not accomplishing their goals or for bad behavior versus incentivizing people with good behavior. So use carrots more than sticks. It's more effective. People will appreciate it more. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times when you have to use sticks. There are certainly some occasions when you have to use sticks, but the vast majority of the time, you could accomplish your goals by using carrots as opposed to using sticks. And it really did take me a long time to learn this leadership skill. And it really is a more effective way of making decisions, and is using carrots rather than sticks. And then the next slide, I think, might be my last slide. Let me just add, and these aren't C's, so we've removed the C's now. But these are things that I've learned also. It's the importance of humility and gratitude. If you look at the definition of humility, is the feeling or attitude that you have no special importance that makes you better than others. And at first glance, it may seem like it's a negative quality or like a sign of weakness rather than strength. But in reality, humility is a type of modesty that'll get you very far in your life as a person, and I think as a leader. And humility, in my opinion, in fact, is one of the most powerful and important attributes of leadership and of growth. Being humble helps you to build trust and facilitates learning, which are key aspects of leadership and personal development. And then being gracious and having gratitude. These leadership positions are tough decisions and tough positions to be in, and they can be draining. And it's easy to get in the mode of complaining for what you don't have. And I think that can become overly negative and really wear on you mentally. So try to have gratitude, be thankful for what you have, and you will end up having more. And so with that, I think I've ended right at 35 minutes. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And again, I want to thank Don and the school and and everybody for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. It's been a great experience. Georgia Tech has had a huge influence and impact on my life, and I really appreciate being able to come back and share my thoughts.
Well, hi, I'm Matthew Nice. I'll be running the questions today, but thank you so much, Dr. DesRoches, for that great lecture. I think everyone's learned a lot today. I'm going to be going into the questions now. If anyone else has questions, we have a couple in there already. Please feel free to put them under Q&A, and I'll be reading them off to Dr. DesRoches. So our first one comes from Kristen Sally, who asks, what advice, for example, about networking, teaching, publishing, etc., would you give a student, both during the PhD and when seeking a faculty role, who wants to eventually take on leadership roles in academia, such as yourself?
Yeah, so let me just talk about networking as one thing that's really important, both as a PhD student and certainly as a faculty member. And then I'll speak to the leadership aspect. Certainly, networking is one of the most important things you can do as a young faculty member and as a student. Building the network of people that you can bounce ideas off of and engage with is absolutely critical to your long-term success. I think it's one of the most critical things to a young faculty member's long-term success is the networking aspect and building a cohort of peers out there. And as far as taking on leadership roles, I think in academia, you'll have plenty of opportunities to be on a variety of committees. And I really encourage, there are some people that have the mentality that young faculty should not be involved. They should focus on their research and teaching and not be involved in service. I have a different view on it. I think you need to get involved in service and leadership early on because it really does develop your leadership opportunities. You can do it. You can balance that with the other aspects of your job. But I don't like to shelter faculty by saying, don't get involved in service early on, just focus on your research. You can do it because it also builds some other aspects of your skill sets, which will allow you to be successful when you become an academic.
Excellent. I think that answered your question. So our next one comes from Glossio, who says, regarding your point on change, he says, change is scary. In general, faculty members are successful people, and that's the reason why they were hired. Why to change if one is being successful? And he's asking if they're hiring successful staff, why do we change them, or why do they need to change?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Glossio, and congratulations on your recent induction to the NAE. Yeah, no doubt, faculty are successful people, but we can all always be more successful. And I think this is probably something you're asking for your students that may think that they've done everything quite right and they've achieved everything and they don't need to learn more. But we all can be better at something, and we all can be more successful, despite the fact that we may be successful and have accomplished a lot. We all can improve. And I think where people run into problems is when they think they have nothing else to learn. And that's when you're going to run into problems. We all can learn better. We all can develop skills. We all need to reflect on what areas am I not very good at and how can I build those areas. And that's what I always tell my students. Figure out where you're not. Get out of your comfort zone. If there are some things you don't do well, try to do those things more so that you can improve your skills in areas where you're not strong. So we can all be better, is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely right. Our next one is not so much of a question, but Barry wanted to hope you got through the cold well out there in Texas. Hope you managed that all right.
Thank you, Dr. Goodnow, and great to hear from you. Gary was one of my very early close friends at Georgia Tech. Yeah, I think the weather was certainly awoken a lot of people in Texas about our need to really do better, and the importance of infrastructure and the importance of civil engineering and what we do as a society. But fortunately, we've most of us have managed well, and we're very fortunate. One of the things I've learned is we really come together as a university. We help people we invited people that had problems with their homes, faculty that lost power. We invited them to come to campus and stay on campus. So we really pulled together during this time. But fortunately, I didn't have any significant problems.
Oh, that's great to hear. Dr. Watkins asks, how should universities provide carrots to encourage faculty and staff, and even students, to do more service both to the institute and in the community?
Yeah, so I think it needs to be part of the incentive structure, right? So I think you need to make it clear whether it's part of the promotion and tenure process that is considered adequately, or whether it's part of the reward system when you're going through annual raises. I think some of the challenges we have at a university is we don't have big carrots, right? I mean, I always say this from my faculty, we don't really have big carrots like a company where you might be able to get terminated or you can get big raises. We tend to have fairly modest raises, but you should make it part of the reward system, both from the tenure perspective as well as from annual evaluations and raises and so forth.
Okay. Dr. Miller has asked, the coronavirus poses extraordinary challenges for leaders. How has your own leadership style changed, if at all, in the past year, particularly in communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is an absolute great question. I think one of the things that I've learned is about the importance of constantly communicating with the faculty. Tons of decisions have to be made. Obviously I'm part of the leadership team here at Rice, and we're, particularly early on where we had to make decisions about whether we're going to close campus, whether we're going to have classes in person, whether we're going to be in hybrid mode, whether we're going to require masks and 6 feet, et cetera. And so one thing I learned is the importance of constantly communicating with the faculty, constantly bouncing every idea off of my deans that I can, because it's easy for me just to be part of the leadership team, make a decision, and then I hear from my deans, you didn't consult us. Why didn't you consult us? And so one of the things I learned is the importance of reaching out, as I put in that slide on consultative leadership, reaching out to a broad audience. What do the students think about this decision? What do the faculty think? What do the staff think? What do the deans think? And so I learned that it's absolutely important to engage people constantly before you make a decision that's going to impact a number of people.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Mike Saunders says, Provost Reggie is not a difficult person. He's as easygoing and refreshing as ever, and he's providing us all with exceptional lessons. But he says, no real question, but he'd appreciate some comments on working in toxic environments.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. I think it starts with leadership. I'll say two things. I think it certainly starts with leadership. What I found is if you have really good, effective leaders, they find a way to build an environment that's not toxic. Oftentimes when you find a toxic environment, somebody's at the top that's not really keeping an eye out for the department or the school or the group and allowing it to be toxic. So I think having the right leadership at that level is critical. And honestly, in some cases, you want to avoid this if possible, but you want to just minimize the impact that the toxic person can have on the organization. And there are ways to do that also. But that is a great question, and that is something that is constantly a challenge.
Absolutely. Blake Peck, Reggie, you once made quite an impression with my firm's leadership when speaking on the value of being purposeful in your actions. Can you share with the audience?
Hey, Blake, good to virtually see you or hear from you. Again, Blake is one of the many alumni I got to get to know while I was at Georgia Tech. I think you want to make sure that everything you're doing has a purpose. I mean, you really want to, be purposeful in your actions and make sure that you think about doing things that matter and doing things that are the right thing to do. Sometimes, and it's tough in these positions, but again, I think for me, is always sticking with both the core values of the organization that I'm part of, my own core values, what I believe in and what I think is right. And if you stick with those, whether people agree with you or not, you'll be able to sleep better because you've done things that have purpose and have meaning and align with your own core values.
All right. So our next question comes from, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce correctly, Raul Delgado.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
From Lima, Peru. He says, being a CE like myself, what do you think the pandemic might bring changes in curriculum to CE to accommodate to a new normal on job sites? Part of them could work as remote, but others will not.
Yeah, so I think, when you talk about curriculum change, there are a couple of things in curriculum change. I'll speak to two aspects, and it may not be exactly your question, but I'll try to answer two pieces to that. There's the change in how people learn and teach, and the increasing importance of remote learning, and I think that's here to stay. I don't think we're going to go. There are some people that say that the traditional university is going away and we're going to all go online. I absolutely do not believe that's going to happen to places like Georgia Tech and places like Rice. I think having a residential college experience will continue. I do think there will be an increasing role for online learning. Obviously, Georgia Tech is a leader in that. I don't need to lecture you on that. I do think, more broadly speaking, I think that people are looking back at their curriculums now to see whether or not we are educating people to be lifelong learners. And so, I think, and this might not sound great coming from an engineering background, but I think having a strong liberal arts background is absolutely critical to being a lifelong learner and understanding the context of what you're doing and the importance of what you're doing and how it ties in with history and so forth. And so I think you're going to see, certainly for me, one of my goals at Rice is to look at the curriculum and make sure that our students have a broad-based liberal arts education so that they can be lifelong learners, because I guarantee you the job that they're doing when they graduate this May will likely be very different in 5 years and in 10 years. And we want to make sure our students are prepared to be able to change with the times.
Yeah, that's a really smart way of looking at it. One person has asked, what do you consider your most significant challenge and your most significant achievement?
Oh, wow. That's a tough. Well, I would say that certainly my most significant challenging position is this provost job. Managing a university during COVID is extremely challenging. Being a provost during COVID is extremely challenging with all the aspects. I think managing universities is difficult despite COVID, but certainly at a time like now with COVID and all the limitations you have and not being able to be in person and what that means for the students and engagement is certainly a challenge. I think for accomplishments, to me, the most important thing I've done has to do with the ability to impact students, whether it's in the classroom. I've had nearly 30 PhD students. Nothing gets me more excited than to see them go on and do great things. And so for me, that's sort of the most important achievement I've had, is be able to pass on, to work with incredible students and see them go on and be successful and advise their own students and so forth. So that's, without a doubt, what I'd say is my greatest achievement.
That's great. I actually might ask on top of that, you mentioned earlier how being a provost, you have to balance between administration and your staff. And I was wondering how you address that challenge, because I feel like any leadership position, you're going to have people above you and below you, and you have to sort of figure out how to balance that.
It is absolutely tough, and I'm sure Provost McLaughlin can relate to that, but it's absolutely tough. I mean, the administration has certain goals they want you to achieve. Often it's relating to being more efficient and cutting costs, and faculty want to grow programs, they want to build new things, and so you have to figure out how you can achieve both. It's a balancing act, and it's a really thin wire you're trying to balance. But again, to me, it's sort of, you go back to your mission and your vision and your core values, and it takes compromise. You often have to compromise, so you go back to the faculty and say, okay, we need to do this, and I understand you want to do this, but let's think about how we can achieve both of those goals at the same time. It takes a lot of conversation, a lot of compromise, and a lot of working with people. And that's why I talked about early on, the first slide was building relationships and building connections. Because once you have connections with people, at least they'll trust you. They may not agree with you, but if they trust you, they're much more willing to work with you on change, which is very, very difficult to do.
All right, thank you. Paul Main wants to know if you remember that when you got stuck in the Hightower building office elevator, or got stuck in the building office with Glenn Riggs, yeah, Jimmy Lay, and Amir.
And that's, Paul, a great example of being resilient and adaptable. And I had to be resilient because it was a terrible space that we were in, but I knew that we would be moved to a much better space than we did. But I was adaptable. I was a brand new professor, and so I had to go with the flow. And that's another important trait that you have to remember, is going with the flow.
That's a funny experience, but good learning experience as well, I suppose. Lawrence Jacobs wants to know what leadership advice you have for Steve Cohen, the new owner of the Mets.
Go out and buy as much talent as you can. Go out and spend, spend, spend. That's exactly the let's build a championship team for the Mets, and don't money is no issue. I can't say that as Provost because it's all money is always an issue. But for the Mets, money is no issue. Go out and buy talent. Let's bring that championship back home where it belongs.
All right. Yongxing Chen says, thanks for an informative talk. You have been in leadership in both institutions. Do you have any recommendations for Georgia Tech?
I would hesitate to give Georgia Tech any recommendations. You guys have an incredible university, incredible leadership. Again, I mentioned the great provost you have, a new dean you have, great faculty. I think as we are all doing, I think we're all thinking about what higher education, how it will change post-COVID. And this is something that's on my mind. I'm sure it's on your provost's mind. And I think we have to be cognizant of what the future looks like and constantly questioning how we might have to adapt to the changes that are happening in higher education. And I have no doubt Georgia Tech will be able to adapt just like everybody else who's thinking about this.
Great. Someone would like you to comment on the roles of diversity, equity, and inclusion in today's evolving universities.
Yeah, that's a great question. Clearly, we're in a unique time with all the events of last year and what's happening in DC. I think when you think about what makes universities effective in this space, I think it starts with leadership. I think it has to be important at the very top of a university. The leaders have to truly believe in the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of what you do. It just can't be in certain aspects, and it can't be stovepipe. You can't have a diversity element here and not have it here. It has to be across the entire university, and you have to have it from the very, very top on down. And that's when that's when you see impact, is when it's really from the very top down.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any more questions before we close it off? Lots of great questions so far, everybody. If not, I'll say thank you, Dr. DesRoches, for a great lecture, and I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Kennedy for some closing remarks.
Okay, so thank you, Matthew, and I want to add my thanks to say a very, very big thank you to you, Dr. DesRoches. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. Thank you for a thoughtful lecture. So with that, I have two announcements. The first is that the School of CE launched our first ever entrepreneurial impact competition this year. So the competition is open to all individuals and teams of students at both undergraduate and graduate levels. And it is an opportunity for us to bring entrepreneurial ideas that improve the human condition. So we are hoping this competition will help foster entrepreneurial mindset and culture among our students and help you launch all the innovative ideas you have as they come up. Our panel of judges, Dr. Lisa Rosenstein, Dr. David Frost, KP Reddy, Kendall Kelly, Dr. Leo Emiga, have been spending a lot of time reviewing these proposals, and we have our finalists to announce today. Let me say our finalist competition will be on March 19th. We hope you put that on your calendars and attend. The innovations in water treatment, bio-inspired technologies, agriculture, sanitation, microplastic sensors, and so on. Our finalists are Culturia, Eli Berger, Abigail Cohen, Thomas Eagle, and Elliot Reed with Culturia, the first finalist. Second finalist is John Hunton. And the third finalist is Riva Recon with Matthew Falcone, Erin Kowalski, Tim Previs, and Kaylin Dali. And our fourth finalist is Volta with Nissim Gordata, Maureen Jarin, and Jiafeng Zhu. So congratulations to all our four teams, and thank you to all who submitted proposals to the competition. I'd like to invite you all to join us on March 19th. We'll be online on Blue Jeans like this event at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And the two winners will take home a $5,000 prize each, sponsored by two generous donors, Bill and Elizabeth Higginbotham, and the Zeitlin family. Thank you to them. The second announcement is that our next Hyatt speaker is going to be Blake Peck, Yellow Jacket CE87, founder of MVP in the fall of 2021, and the date is October 5th. So with that, I'd like to say thank you again to Vice Provost DesRoches, and we have come to the end of our event. Have a great day, everyone.